Welcome to Talkless Water, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Butler, and I'm your host for Talkless Water. My guest today is Kirsten James. Kirsten is a Senior Program Director for Water at Ceres. Kirsten directs Ceres' strategy supporting investors and companies in addressing challenges facing our freshwater systems. Her work includes leading the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, a global effort to support investors working with companies to reduce financial risk stemming from water scarcity, pollution, and damage to freshwater ecosystems. Previously, Kirsten served for 5 years as the Director of California Policy and Partnerships at Ceres, where she led strategy development for Ceres' California-focused policy work, engaging companies and investors in support of public policies that call for sustainable water management, clean energy, and greenhouse gas emission reductions in California. Prior to her time at Ceres, Kirsten worked for water resource-focused NGOs as their NGO, I should say, as their science and policy director. She graduated with a bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and a master's degree in environmental science and management from the Bren School at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Kirsten, welcome to Talkless Water, and thank you for making time to talk with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's start out with your background in water. I always like to, ask the same question to everybody. Because, you get some very different answers. And I think it's informative for people who are, kind of on the water journey themselves, right? For their careers or otherwise. So when did you first become interested in water issues?
Yeah, well, it's fun to think about my trajectory and my water career. And I need to go all the way back to undergraduate to really see where I first got the start. So I was searching around the Chicago area for an internship to fill my summers during undergraduate. And I found a position with the Great Lakes National Program Office at US EPA Region 5. And so I joined their team as an intern, worked on a variety of issues. A summer internship actually turned into a 2-year internship, which actually then turned into my thesis research for my undergraduate thesis. And that really launched my start into the water world. And there's been really a through line throughout my career. After graduating, I went to the California water boards and worked on water quality issues around the northern part of California. So would get out in the field and do monitoring, would visit wastewater treatment facilities, would work on stormwater issues. And then I went back to school and honed in on some of my skills and knowledge a little bit more. And then after that, I went to the nonprofit based in Southern California, Heal the Bay, a regional nonprofit working a lot on water quality, ocean protection issues here in the Southern California region, became their science and policy director. And then after my tenure at Heal the Bay, came over to Ceres. So it's been water has really been a through line throughout all of my career thus far.
Well, it's interesting that, you had an internship at EPA. I had one with the EPA in DC, which evolved to an internship or I was a graduate researcher is what they called me. And that evolved to me going to the Region 6 office. And the work I did there on wetlands, I developed this wetlands risk assessment methodology that ended up being the subject of my thesis for grad school. So, yeah.
A lot of similarities, yeah.
Right. So let's start out with Ceres. So tell us about Ceres' mission and its work on water issues.
Yeah, so Ceres is a nonprofit advocacy organization. We actually have been around for around 40 years now. We're founded in response to the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And what we do is we work to accelerate the transition to a more resilient economy. And we do this by working with investors and companies and really encouraging them to act on the world's sustainability challenges, including our discussion today, issues around water scarcity, water pollution, nature loss. That is our broad focus at Ceres. And then, on the water team, we really are engaging around water resource issues because, let's face it, every industry needs, water to thrive and survive if they're going to be a viable business. And so we really are looking at the challenges that water and the lack thereof, poses to the companies and the private sector, whether it's, increased market risk, operational risk, regulatory risk, reputational risks that they may be facing in the communities. So we look at how all of those could impact a company's long-term business and their value. And then with that in mind, we work to really educate and capacity build around what those water risks, as we call them, really are, and how the private sector can act and mitigate those risks. So we've, spent the last decade plus really focused on water and supporting investors and companies that are advancing solutions and best practices on water management.
So it's interesting. So how do those relationships with these companies develop? Are you usually or typically are y'all kind of reaching out to them, or do they contact you independently? And I'm guessing the many of these larger companies who have, I guess, sustainability managers, are those typically the people that you work with at those companies?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Ceres has been around for around 40 years. So, in that time, we've really built relationships and trust with the community, and they really see us as a thought leader in the space. And so, over time, we've built these relationships, we've built that trust, and we still work with these same companies, many that have done really great work thus far, but have more to do, and so really turn to Ceres, to support them in that journey. And then the same with our investor partners. We have networks of investors that have joined us and work with Ceres on a variety of work and issues. And so, when it comes to water, we've really worked with them to see that these risks are real, and that if they're going to really, ensure that they are a viable business moving forward, and that these investors are, making sound investment decisions, they need to consider water, and they need to think about those risks. And, they turn to Ceres to work with them and help sort of show them what they need to do.
Yeah, it strikes me that this is significant work with significant results that probably the public doesn't hear about all that often. You hear a lot of times about various water projects or lands have been conserved or something of that nature. But the work that y'all are doing to help corporations and improve their operations with regard to water, for example, it's probably something that's going on all the time that people don't know about, and kind of a maybe flying under the radar good news story in some ways.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's interesting because I sort of juxtapose my work at Ceres with my previous position at Heal the Bay, and we were a very known group in our community, and everyone knew or knows the Heal the Bay logo, and our work is very visible. And as you mentioned, the work at Ceres maybe is a little bit more behind the scenes and less visible because, we really believe that, the private sector needs to be the voices that are out there, really explaining why this is, a risk to them and why they need to act and how they're acting and really need to be very publicly transparent about how they're acting. So, I think some of what we do maybe is lesser known, but, it's a really critical piece. In fact, when I came to Ceres, I really was so excited about sort of the theory of change of this organization and really saw the important inroads that really needed to be made with the private sector and how Ceres could really, be that partner to help them create that change. So it's really an exciting place to be in the water world.
So let's follow up on that. You come to Ceres and you have got your own specific role. Can you discuss what your responsibilities are, and maybe give us some examples of some of the projects that you participate in at Ceres?
Yeah, so at a very high level, I oversee Ceres water programs. So what do we do? Well, we provide a lot of research and support for investors and companies who are working to address water risk and really advance their corporate water stewardship. So at a high level, that's what we're looking at. But, to give you some examples, to put a little bit more color on that, one example is when I first joined Ceres, I was working more on the public policy side of the house. And so I led a program we called Connect the Drops here in California. And this initiative brought together 35 companies, multinational companies with strong leadership in water stewardship. And we worked to identify public policy opportunities for engagement because, these companies really realized in order to drive water sustainability in California, the private sector needed to come to the table, and we needed to ensure that, we were in the midst of a drought, a 7-year drought at that point. And, we really needed strong public policy to make sure that we had sustainable water resources moving forward. So that was an early example of a project that I worked on. More recently, doing more with investor engagement with companies, as we've mentioned. So a number of years ago, one project I worked on was a global engagement on meat sourcing, where we focused on water risk and major fast food companies. And sort of a similar model that I described, we would, educate investors, bring our expertise to the table, and the investors that were shareholders of these quick service restaurants, so your McDonald's of the world, your Domino's of the world, they would work with these companies and really trying to mobilize them to take action on their water risks. And that really paved the way for, the current piece of work that we're really focused on, the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, where we're engaging with over 100 investors from around the globe. And they're working with us to really move companies in the food, beverage, apparel, and high-tech sectors to really mitigate those water-related risks and improve their water management practices. So hopefully I can talk about that a little bit more later, but that really is our current keystone initiative. And then, with all of our work, we really, really have that sort of accountability mechanism baked in as well. So we do a lot with benchmarking and seeing how companies are performing and how they're performing over time, and making improvements and where they need to continue to really focus and work. So, we started actually a decade ago with our first water benchmark called Feeding Ourselves Thirsty. We just released our latest benchmark about a month ago, really looking at corporate water stewardship and taking a deep look at that. So, the research accountability is also a key piece of our work as well.
So it's interesting to me, just thinking about, the time that Ceres was founded. A lot of the water community NGOs were in an adversarial role or had an adversarial relationship with industries, pretty frequently, and I can see how if you're coming to somebody and saying, hey, we can help you reduce your water risk, that's a whole different conversation. And, you have a different relationship that flows from that. And, corporate partners that otherwise, would like to, reduce their water footprint and, reduce their impact on the environment. I imagine it's makes for a much better atmosphere for mutually, achieving those goals.
Yeah, I think so. When you come to the table and you're talking about dollars and cents and you're talking about how, doing this water stewardship can actually help ensure, the finances, moving forward and a strong economic position, that really unlocks a lot of doors when you come, with that lens, to both the companies, but also their investors that have a fiduciary duty to really, work with the companies and ensure, they're mitigating any material risks that they may have. And so it is definitely a very powerful advocacy point, but we are still an advocacy organization, and we are very transparent about that as well. And we just come at things through this different lens, which I think is a very powerful lever of change.
So let's turn to what I understand is one of the most important initiatives that you're working on right now at Ceres, and that's the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. Please tell us about that initiative and what it has accomplished in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we've worked, quite closely with the investment community for quite some time. But, we started really recognizing, 3-4 years ago that, our theory of change, working with shareholders to help move companies on sustainability issues, including water, could be quite powerful. But we also, looked at the headlines around us and saw how, there's one water disaster, after the other. And so we really recognized, we weren't making the change that needed to be happening at the pace it needed to be happening. And so, we really wanted to concept how could we really double down on our efforts and be all the more effective and impactful, with sort of our theory of change. And so that was the, birth of the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. So we launched this initiative back in 2022. And it, at the time and still to current day, is really the only global investor-led effort where investors are supporting companies to prioritize water risk and really act as those responsible stewards in both their operations and in their global supply chains. So, reflecting on the past, 3 years, we've seen more investors than we would have imagined come to the table to work with us on this. So we have now more than 100 investors from around the globe that are working with us to support 71 companies in 4 water-intensive industries. So the apparel, beverage, food, and high-tech industry. And they're specifically working with us to advance these companies in how they are obviously mitigating their water risk, but really with focusing on meeting what we call the 6 corporate expectations for valuing water. And so these are sort of our guiding principles of the initiative, our North Star, so to speak. And so investors are working with companies on, reducing the amount of water that companies are using, reducing water pollution, protecting water supplies for communities, protecting and restoring ecosystems that are critical to those freshwater supplies. Also thinking about the governance aspects. So ensuring that the boards of these corporations are really overseeing these critical water management efforts, and really ensuring that their advocacy and public policy and their work with their communities really aligns with sustainable water management. So these are really sort of the guiding principles of the work. You asked sort of how we've progressed, and I think some of the results thus far are quite exciting. As a result of investor dialogues and engagements with these companies, we're starting to see companies take key foundational steps in developing their water stewardship strategies. So investors, for example, working with companies like, food service giants McDonald's and Domino's Pizza, are really getting the companies to make key commitments, such as conducting comprehensive water risk assessments, which include their supply chain. Supply chain has often been the forgotten piece in the puzzle, so we're seeing a lot of headway there, and really just overall strategies that lessen impacts in water stressed areas. So we, as I mentioned, released a benchmark report about a month ago. And the good news is we're seeing a lot of good progress since the previous benchmark 2 years prior to that. We are seeing many companies improving their scores. 48, in fact, of those 71 companies improve their scores. So some good trends that we are seeing. And we've also, seen companies that aren't on the focus list for investors reach out to us asking to really align with those corporate expectations for valuing water. So that's a really, great sign as well that this initiative really is leading to that change that we're looking for.
So when you're talking about the investors, can you give me some examples? I mean, you don't have to name companies, but is that, for example, like retirement fund for public employees or something like that? Or is it, just individual investors who've got substantial amount of money and they're put it to work around the globe?
Yeah, these investors are institutional investors. So it's a combination of asset owners, so your pension funds, for example, and also asset managers. It is these large institutions that have, very large portfolios, that are encompassing many different companies and many different sectors. So these are the folks that we're working with to advance these issues.
So when you are, looking at the progress that's been made with, I guess, the 6 benchmarks, are there specific metrics you use to measure progress related to those benchmarks?
Yeah, so with our benchmark, we're evaluating specifically those 6 corporate expectations for valuing water. And then within each of those expectations, we also have a number of KPIs and metrics that really speak to how those, the actions and what's being done to advance those corporate expectations. So, we look at around 32 indicators in total, across those 6 expectations, and it involves water use, water quantity, board oversight, ecosystem protection. So it really looks at, in our view, all of the dimensions of water that we really need to be focused on. Community access is another key pillar as well. So, we're looking at metrics that really help us understand how corporates are engaging on all of those dimensions of water.
So when you see, for example, some metrics for some companies that are maybe not doing as well as for others, do you provide them with tools to address whatever that is, and to get better results? Do y'all work with them I guess more directly, and how does that work? I'm just curious about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, definitely. On a number of different levels, we really support the companies to take action as a result of what we find in the benchmark. So one is just we're very transparent with the data and with how we're approaching the methodology. So we publish the methodology. We in fact get input from the companies in between the benchmarking to see, hey, is Ceres off somewhere in your view? How can we improve this methodology to really get to the crux of the issues? So we're very transparent in that. And I think that in and of itself lends itself for companies to reflect on, where they may have gaps and what have you. We also do a lot of, connecting with the companies themselves and really, reaching out and having one-on-one conversations with our Ceres water experts and the companies themselves, and really talk about, where are your strengths, where are you doing really well, but then also, where should maybe you be placing attention. So we find those very helpful as well, those conversations. And we also, of course, do capacity building with the investors around the benchmark so that they can really take that latest data and use it to have really informed conversations with the companies and really, honing in on the areas that really, need focus. So all of those really, I think, go into advancing, what the companies are actually going to prioritize and going to do. And one thing that, across the board, we really hear time and time again that's really helpful is, when we do this analysis, we pick different what we see as shining examples. So we draw out where companies have really excelled and where other companies could potentially learn from those other companies, and that peer-to-peer learning is really something that we think is really critical. Why reinvent the wheel if your peer company has really made some good inroads with, some sort of avenue of effort? And so we draw those out and really highlight those throughout our published report and in conversations with companies. So just as an example of how we really draw out that best practice that then hopefully can be an inspiration to others. When it comes to water use, for example, that's obviously a key factor in our benchmark analysis. And so in looking through all of the public disclosures and the data assessment, we really draw out key examples of where companies are really being successful here. So one such example is, Apple has committed to replenishing all of its fresh water withdrawals in high stress areas by 2030 and has set a goal to achieve 50% water reuse rate by 2050 in its supply chain. So, that's an example of a best practice that we've drawn out. Another example on the water quality front with the benchmark, we see that water quality continues to be an area that's lagging behind, and fewer than half of the companies have set targets to reduce water pollution. But as a bright spot, we found that Cargill has committed to reducing 5,000 metric tons of pollutants in water stress regions across its operations, supply chains, and communities by 2030 through things like improved agricultural practices and nutrient management and restoration of lands. So, that's another example of that best practice that we draw out in our work and then disseminate to other companies and hopefully inspire them to take similar actions.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit here, in addition to the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, I know Ceres is doing other things related to water. And I understand that earlier this year, Ceres produced a report on the topic du jour in the water community, and that's data centers. So can you tell us about that study and the conclusions of the study?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the Valley Water Finance Initiative has, for a number of years now, worked on the high tech industry and really had that as a focus because of, their various water risks. And so, we really wanted to understand, what really is the full suite of water risks associated with data centers, which are really front and center in this industry. And so, we were observing, through various research and articles that we read, that there were a very high number of data centers that were being placed in areas of high or extremely high water stress. And in fact, the latest figures I saw are that 32% of data centers in the U.S. are in these high stress water regions. And so we really wanted to understand, with these accumulation of data centers in these high stress areas, what is the larger impact that we're seeing? And, on top of that, we're hearing a lot about the large energy consumption from these data centers. And so, we all know that to generate power, you need water for various processes. And so, how does that play into all of this? And so we decided to do a case example of an area that we're seeing this proliferation of data centers, and that was the Phoenix region. And so we really started diving into the data, again, publicly available data. And we looked at really, what are the risks and, how much water are these data centers, really using, and what does that mean for water risk? And so, getting to the crux of what we found that in the Phoenix area, water demands associated with, the direct water use from cooling within the data centers, but then also the indirect use from the data centers and their electricity generation could increase water stress in some areas of the Phoenix region by as much as 32% if all of the currently planned data centers come online. And as we tease that out, we really found in this region that the annual use from data center electricity demand is really central to this discussion. And we found that in this case, there was an expected increase in water use from a data center electricity demand by as much as 400%. And so putting that in layman's terms, that is enough water to supply the city the size of Scottsdale, Arizona, more than 240,000 people for over 2 years, if you look at sort of annual U.S. averages. So pretty staggering statistics. And, we just keep seeing more and more data centers being planned in these regions. I know Texas, where you're based, is definitely seeing these concentrations as well. In fact, latest number I looked at, there were nearly 430 data centers in Texas that we're either in the ground or being planned with, the Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio and Austin areas is really concentrated. So, this is we did our example in Arizona, but I think the findings really translate to other regions and really speak to the fact that we just really need to understand what those cumulative risks really are and then manage appropriately.
So, turns out last week, I was in Arizona, in Phoenix, with my colleague Aaron Wolf, and we were presenting a water conflict transformation workshop to a number of NGOs in Arizona. And, kind of the what we were focused on there in some ways were how issues surrounding groundwater can be addressed. And so, when I look at data centers and Bitcoin mines, right? It seems like, the target there for locating them is typically like cheap land and cheap energy, and they're not really, the water's an after fact, and some of them, I get the impression, they really don't really do a whole lot of research on the water aspect of it, and so that has really generate a lot of concern, as you mentioned, in West Texas, for example, and in Arizona, where as is become evident in the last few years, they've got groundwater issues that they are struggling to address and to find some common ground on how they're going to manage groundwater going forward. So, yeah, I'm sure that this is not probably the first time I'm going to talk about. I think it's the second time probably I've mentioned data centers, but I'm starting to think, okay, I probably should go ahead and have an episode on data centers. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot to discuss, and I think it's just emerging sort of all of the complex issues that we really need to think about when it comes to data centers, and the various trade-offs that we need to think about, and all the various uses in the basin, that this will be competing with. So there's definitely a lot to talk about. It's a complex issue, but, I think the bottom line for us is that, we really need to understand when you consider the specifics of a region, what the impacts from the proliferation would be, and, have the governance systems in place that really speak to that. And so we don't really wipe out all those efficiency gains in places like Phoenix that they've worked so hard to make. We want to keep the trend line going in the right direction.
So here we are before Christmas, and probably this podcast will be released in January. What do you think the focus of Ceres' work with water risks will be in 2026?
Yeah, well, we're really excited about what the year has to bring for us. I think, we are just seeing more and more interest in the issues that we're working on from our investor community, from, the corporate community. So I think, we have a lot of energy around these issues, and with our benchmark data in hand from just a few months ago, we really hope to, utilize that and have sort of a data-driven approach as we work with investors and companies, and support them in developing, strategies to build and evolve, holistic and impactful water stewardship. And so, at a high level, we're going to be continuing on with all of that through our Valuing Water Finance initiative. I think there's been some good inroads, but there's definitely a lot that we need to still do. We'll continue to build on our research. Data centers, obviously, as we talked about, is an issue that is not going away. And so we'll be building on our data center analysis and thinking of other ways that we can really shed light on the issue and what the business risk is in all of that, and really understand, the full range of water risk issues with data centers. We're also excited for various major convenings that are coming up, including the United Nations Water Conference at the end of the year in December, where, hopefully we can really take a check on our global progress, or perhaps places where we still need to work, which I'm sure will, of course, rise to the top. And so we look forward to really bringing those financial and private sector voices into those conversations, and really figure out how we're going to all move forward together and ensure sustainable water supplies for years to come.
So where's that conference going to be?
So the conference is actually taking place in the United Arab Emirates. So definitely a very place with water as front and center of an issue. And that'll be in December of next year.
Are you going to go?
I will likely go. I went to the last one, which was a few years back in New York, and it was quite an important opportunity to bring together leading voices in the space. So haven't booked my flight yet, but I would likely be going, I would say.
Well, I'm envious. So that sounds like a great trip. So let's go ahead and move to our final question then. So, Kirsten, how can our listeners find out more about water initiatives at Ceres?
Well, all of our latest reports and research and information about our programs can be found at ceres.org, and that's spelled CERES.org. And of course, you can follow us on all of the social media platforms as well. But yeah, I encourage your listeners to take a look at our research and hopefully utilize it in their own work.
Great. And let me just say thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot.
Wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I always love talking about water with other water wonks. So thank you.
When the water folks get together, it's hard to, get them to stop talking sometimes. Yeah,
I know. We could go on for hours.
Right. Yeah. Well, this has been Talkless Water, and my guest today was Kirsten James, the Senior Program Director for Water at Ceres. I want to thank you, the listener, for spending your valuable time on this podcast. Finally, I want to give a big thank you to Anna Jones and Sarah Wingfield at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for getting this episode of Talkless Water ready to go. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review to let us know how we did. And, if we didn't do well, you can let us know that too. That's fine. My name is Todd Bottler. Let's talk water again soon.